The definition of leader for me is that when you look over your shoulder, that there's some people there. Because otherwise, if you look over your shoulder and there's nobody following you, you just have declared yourself a title. But in efficacy, there's no functionality there. And so in many ways, we as leaders don't necessarily have to say anything to lead. People look to us to see how we respond and how we reply.
My conversation with Dr. Emmett G. Price III on Make Room, Black Leaders in the 21st Century begins now. Well, welcome. This is Make Room, Black Leaders of the 21st Century. I am your host, Pastor Kenneth Young. Make Room is all about an opportunity to help us define what leadership is, what does it do, and particularly in our Black leaders. There's a lot of written material from servant leadership, and we can continue to name books, but a lot of those things really don't pertain to Black leadership. So how do leaders lead? What do good leadership looks like? And what does good leaders do? And what qualities define good leadership? So I'm so excited today just to have our special guest here with us, my mentor, none other than Dr. Emmett G. Price. Dr. Price is an internationally recognized expert on Black music and culture, Afro-Diasporic, sacred and secular expressions, and Christian worship. Dr. Price has the unique ability to capture the hearts and minds of the most diverse and versatile audiences with his compassionate sense of humor and his quick wit. He's a sought-after keynote speaker and motivational speaker. He is also the co-executive producer and co-host of the very popular All Revved Up podcast. Dr. Price, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, thank you for the invitation. I am just absolutely excited to be with you. And you know, before we start the conversation, how proud I am of you, just being a family man and a dynamic leader in your own right, and for how you have envisioned the opportunity to fill gaps. And it's strange that in 2022, within Black communities and within Black ecclesial spaces, there are still these leadership gaps. And so I want to thank you for your guidance, for your leadership, for your wisdom and your maturity in handling all the foolishness that we have to handle in these days.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I just want to open up. Can you just tell us, I said your introduction, but can you just tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I'm originally from Los Angeles. I often joke that I was born in the right city, just at the wrong time. And so I came up, during the height of the, gang warfare, a very corrupt Los Angeles Police Department, and all kinds of, plight within the Black community. And I often say that three things saved my life: God-fearing parents who are still on the planet, and I thank God for them. A phenomenal church, Trinity Baptist Church, 2040 West Jefferson Boulevard, there in Los Angeles, and music, the gift of music. The existence of something like music that really captured my heart, captured my attention, and became a huge focus of my life, and how I see the life, how I see my life, how I live my life is not just as a musician, but musically as well. And then, of course, I did all the academic stuff, and I had the privilege of going to some great universities, being trained and mentored by some phenomenal people. And everything that is invested in me, my desire is to give it away, to make sure that I don't hoard anything, and that when it's my time to take my rest, that I don't have all of this good stuff, these gems, these nuggets, these riches that are going to sit in my casket with me. I don't want that. So I want to deposit it. I want to deplete myself of all these gems and nuggets and riches that many people have invested in me. So that's me in a nutshell.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. You talked about growing up at the wrong time. Can you tell us about strong leaders and how they help you get through those tough times in your community?
Absolutely. So I had some phenomenal human beings, first in my mom and my dad, who even in their season of life of not necessarily knowing how to navigate the challenges of big city Los Angeles. My mother's from the backwoods of Alabama. My daddy was born and raised in New Orleans, came of age in Los Angeles, and then went off to Vietnam. And then when he came back, I show up. And so, parents who are afraid, literally afraid for a young Black man. And so although we didn't have conversations around fear, we had conversations around empowerment and around how, if you learn how to navigate the unknown, then you're going to always be okay. If you learn how to use a compass and learn how to use a map, I'm talking figuratively, of course, then you're going to always be okay. And then I had a phenomenal pastor. I had a number of pastors. Elliot J. Mason Sr. was my first pastor. And then the one who I really came to faith under was Pastor Dumas Alexander Harshaw, who saw leadership values and skills in me and would often take me to lunch, and created a youth council and kind of appointed me to be the president of the young people at the church, and would sit with me and would help me to learn how to hold myself accountable before holding others accountable, and also to how to envision what life should look like through not only our imagination, but also our historical perspective. And so when the gang violence had erupted in Los Angeles, and particularly around the season of Rodney King, which had been 1991, and then of course the trial, 1992, my pastor would always just kind of pull us aside and say that things will get better, not because they're going to get better, but because we're going to help them to get better, which means that we had to roll up our sleeves and be invested in the betterment of our community, in our neighborhood, in our church, in our people, in our families, etc. And so, having phenomenal people like them, and so many of the church mothers who would just come around, and in those moments when they can look in your eyes and see that you had lost your hope and that you had lost your way, would just hug you, would just love you in a way without judgment, and just say, baby, it'll be all right, without even knowing exactly what it was. And so, I come from that kind of nurturing community, and those kind of individuals who were not afraid of sagging pants, who are not afraid of a couple of misplaced words that may have moved into the cussing lane, who were not afraid of, the music that we listen to, the bippity bop and the hippity hop. They were not afraid of that because they saw something in me, and they saw something in other young people that said, you matter, your life matter, even before there was a hashtag.
Wow. Man, that's really good. I really appreciate you, opening that up and saying that in such a way that hits our hearts, and it really helps us transition and pivot to this conversation about leadership and crisis, because it sounds like about seeing leaders in crisis. You talked about gang violence in LA, Rodney King. We recently saw a shooting in Buffalo.
Yeah.
Some people were able to see the video that the shooter posted live, is my understanding, via Twitch. In light of the Buffalo shooting, 10 African Americans, Blacks, killed at the Tops supermarket in an African American community. Some have deemed him to be a white vigilante. There's conversations around domestic terrorism. This has been called a massacre. Some of these good folks who were gunned down were good church-going mothers and deacons. What was your immediate response when you heard about the massacre in Buffalo?
Yeah, I've learned, Pastor Young, to catch my breath. I've literally learned to catch my breath. And so what that means is that at a certain point, I turn off all the media and I close up my phone and I cut my computer off, because I know that I can catch up on the media cycle. But I got to catch my breath, because that level of trauma, those individuals, and we can call their 10 names, but those individuals are our family members. They may just have a different last name as we do, but those are our family members. They may be from different cities than we are, but those are our family members. So I think about the 32-year-old sister who was the youngest of 4 siblings, who had disrupted her entire life because her brother had just had bone marrow surgery and she wanted to go care for her brother. And I think about that sister. And I think about, the mother who was married to her husband for 68 years. And for the last 8 years, she had cared for him on a daily basis in the elder care facility. And that she would go care for him and then go by the supermarket to grab something to make her supper. And so I think about individuals like that. And I refuse to allow myself to dehumanize the humanity of our beloved. And so the first thing that I did when I turned on the media feed was to try to find their names. And I wrote their names down and I prayed for their families. And then I tried, as you get to the day 2 and the day 3, to learn about them. And so, the shooting happened on the Saturday. And, I have the great privilege of being on NPR radio here in Boston every Monday. And I knew that they were going to ask us, myself and Reverend Irene Monroe, how do we feel about it? What do we think about it? And so I diverted the entire conversation to call out the names of the 10 individuals. And right there on the radio, everything paused. And so that's the first thing, I catch my breath. The second thing that I do is I make sure that I take my temperature and my pulse. So I intentionally bring the rapid movement of my brain to a place where my brain and my mouth are able to be in sync, because our brains are moving so fast. And so I got to slow myself down, because if I don't, my heart rate increases, my blood pressure increases, my anger increases, my frustration increases, and everything is on rage, which is the goal of these horrific situations, to get everybody on rage so that you can create additional tension. So if I can bring myself back down, now I can hear and I can see. And when I can do that, then I can see people who are hurting and I can reach them with the calmness and with the healing touch. And so for me, I have to make sure that I am in the process of healing before I can participate in somebody else's healing. Now, I don't have to be healed and whole, because that's a long-term process, but I have to make sure that I've already initiated my healing process and initiated my sense of wholeness so that I can do the same thing, serve as a catalyst for somebody else.
And I appreciate you saying that, because a lot of us, young, old, in between, we definitely experience that rage.
Yeah.
And those steps, I think, are great. I think a lot of leaders need to learn how to respond versus react.
Yes.
What we have seen a lot is that we see a lot of reaction, and not saying that the reactions are improper, because it is trauma.
Yeah.
From what I've read and heard, most of these folks are good people in the community and were known in their community. Mm-hmm. And so you're seeing a lot of grief. What do you do as a leader who's been called upon now to cope with your own stuff? Mm-hmm. And now you're coping with the community's brokenness?
Yes. I think, the definition of leader for me is that when you look over your shoulder, that there's some people there. Because otherwise, if you look over your shoulder and there's nobody following you, you just have declared yourself a title. But in efficacy, there's no functionality there. And so in many ways, we as leaders don't necessarily have to say anything to lead. People look to us to see how we respond and how we reply. And so I understand that as a leader, I'm always under the spotlight 24/7. Because even when I come home and I shut the drapes and I close the door and lock the door and put my alarm on in my house, I have a wife, I have 2 sons, and they're still looking to see how I respond to these moments. And so the first thing that I would say is be your own authentic self and be honest about that. And also, to the degree that you can, based on your personality, be transparent about that. So I'm an extroverted introvert, right? So on those moments when I need to be in front of people, I can jazz up the charisma to be able to lead effectively. But once that battery is done, I'm back in the corner somewhere, sitting still, all by myself, because I know that about myself. My family knows that about me. So in that moment, I knew that part of my healing process was actually to charge up my battery, because I know that my calling, even though I'm a first responder, I don't need to be the first to respond, right? So as a first responder, I can't go out with a half-charged battery, because I may end up leading people in the wrong direction, and I may end up leading people in the wrong way, in the wrong manner. So for me, my whole notion of leadership is part of my servant attitude as a follower of Christ. So I always think about what would Christ do, and I don't mean to be, cliche about that, but I mean that Christ, even when he engaged in these challenging moments, usually prayed first, and usually got a quiet moment first to hear from heaven. And so I do the same practice, and 9.8 times out of 10, the moment that I quiet myself, the moment I get a revelation. And it's not some kind of James Earl Jones, big voice talking about, hey, go down to 8th Street and, look for the man on the corner and give him $5. It's not that. It's the notion that in this season, people need to hear and experience hope, right? It's not so much resilience. Because I remember you being in my class at the seminary, at an unnamed seminary, at the seminary, and you said to me one time, you said, why do we always have to be resilient? I'm tired of being resilient. I remember you said that to me, and I took that in, and I said, you know what, he is right. The Black community almost wears a badge on our shoulder or a medal on our neck that says the most resilient people on the planet. And I'm like you now, because I rebuke that. I don't want to have to be resilient because I'm Black, right? So, and I don't want to always have to be strong because Black people have always been strong either. So in that sense, I think we have to continue to have a vision for the possibilities and to have a hope for what true equity and true inclusion and true belonging look like, because they don't look like mama and daddy and auntie and them and big mama and big daddy getting shot at a supermarket. That ain't what it looked like. So for me, it's a sense of how do you lead people in a moment where you can be honest about my own hurts and honest about my own pains around that, while also navigating that in the sense that we can take ownership of our collective responsibility to care for one another and to be our brothers and our sisters' keeper. And what does that mean in terms of to take that energy and that power and to move it in a way where we not only care more about us than what they are doing, but that we can be pro-us without having to be perceived as being anti anyone else. And so that's part of the challenge, that we have to learn how to care for ourselves, even in the midst of trying to worry about this notion of what Toni Morrison calls the white gaze, right? Because we're always careful about what white folks are thinking and saying about us, in terms of our actions and activities. And I'm like, Big Sister Toni Morrison, we need to eradicate our being held controlled by that gaze so that we can be who God called us to be in real time.
Man, that's good. That's really good, because I want to get into some sticky stuff right now. I really do, because we got to learn how to make room for people. And so in this moment, even though this is horrific, it is terrifying. Every time this happens, we see this generational divide when it comes to leadership.
Yeah.
Whether it was St. Louis, or Ferguson, where we saw a lot of younger people saying, we don't want, Reverend Al Sharpton or the Black leaders to come. They haven't been down here. You're starting to hear that voice more in what some people may call emerging leaders. There was a clip, even in Buffalo, when the Attorney General of New York came to Buffalo to try to talk. You had one older woman who they considered to be an elder. And then you had some, I would say, young adults, maybe millennials, who were saying, we don't care about the policies. We've been getting killed down here. And I'm kind of paraphrasing what the young man said. How do we navigate this in this moment of crisis? Yes, we want kind of this kumbaya moment of everybody coming together and loving on each other. But there's real pain that people are feeling before this has happened. And some folks feel, especially leaders, feel like maybe the elders have played Black respectability politics, that when you have people of stature in your midst, there's a certain kind of way that you're supposed to act, and a certain kind of way you're supposed to respond to them when they come into your presence. But you have a younger generation who's saying, and we don't really care about that, we care about results.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that when all this other trauma is happening?
Yeah, I mean, the surgeon the surgeon is not the first one on the team to actually bring healing to the patient, right? There's usually a primary care physician who runs a battery of examinations and who kind of sees what's going on and is able to really diagnose the situation. And then that primary care physician will make a referral to a specialist. And then that specialist will do some additional testing to figure out what's going on. And then if they decide that surgery is the route, then that specialist makes the referral to the surgeon. And so I think that that's one moment here, for the proclaimed civil rights folks to just show up and wave off everybody. I will say it as an older person, that's the wrong way to go about it. That's the absolutely wrong way to go about it, because pain is never respectable, and pain don't show up with the politics of respectability. If I'm hurting, you're gonna see me lash out, and I may have to pull that back later on once I check the footage out or whatnot. But you can't expect me in my own town to get shot up in a grocery store and then go home and put my suit on and come back to the scene of the crime and be all presentable or whatnot. I think that's horrific. And I don't think that even during the civil rights movement, that was actually the play. I think there was a different play at hand that we haven't really, gone back and reviewed the footage and actually asked those individuals what was really going on, when you were wearing your Sunday's best. There's a whole lot of nuance there. So I think some of us need to allow ourselves to move to the middle seats, not necessarily the back seats, but the middle seats. Because as a person who is not local to that community, there's a different level of proximity and alignment that needs to occur. So I think the first microphone needs to get placed in front of the local people. But I also need to be an earshot of that, because if I hear something that person may be saying out of pain and out of anger, that they may not want recorded, or that they may not want to be on a 2-minute soundbite that's played on any of the media channels, I have a responsibility to whisper in that person's ear. Not to blast them, but to whisper in that person's ear. Or I have the responsibility to wave off the cameras and say, you know what, let's take a moment here, right? Because there's integrity issues that are here. And whoever controls the narrative has the power. And whoever has the power gets to create the perception around what actually occurred. Not show the perspective, but create the perception. And that's all at play too. And so there's a whole media economic system that privileges Black pain that gets moved around. So that's a whole nother piece of leadership, being able to see that too, because that being played on repetition for the next 2 weeks does no good for anybody, right? So I think that we have to allow our young people to take a front seat, but we also have to leverage them in a place where they know that, yeah, if you look over your shoulder, I got you. I'm not going far, right? And if I need to look over my shoulder, then the seasoned elder who has been through the 40s and the 60s and the 80s and the 2000s and now the 2020s, we'll call them in to do cleanup. So it has to be intergenerational, but it has to privilege the proximate people, and it has to privilege the younger people. Because the young people are going to be here on the planet longer than, prayerfully, the younger people are going to be on the planet longer than those of us who have been here for a little longer. And so we got to let them get their arms and feet into the sand earlier.
So you said a whole lot when it comes to this intergenerational piece, and there are gatekeepers, because we're talking about Black leadership. We gotta be real and talk about this. Yeah. That there are indeed gatekeepers. Yeah. Where some folks feel as if they should get, this is their hour, this is their moment to get into the lights, while others are leading with when the lights are off. What do you say to those leaders who are in the streets, or they're grassroots leaders, or they're street workers, and they're the ones who are actually galvanizing younger people to not have this enraged response to where they are, tearing down the city or blowing up cars and things of that nature? What do you say to them? Because a lot of times they're forgotten leaders.
Yeah, I would tell them to go around the corner and call your own press release. See, because the seasoned folks are going to show up, and that's where you're going to have CBS, NBC, MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, Al Jazeera, you got the litany. But where the real revolution is happening is on Twitter, is on Instagram, is on Facebook. So those individuals who you just called just need to go around the corner. Don't worry about CBS. That's not your audience. Don't worry about MSNBC. That's not your audience either. The people who are following you, who are listening to you, they're on your feed, on your IG feed. They're on your Twitter feed. They're and so go around the corner, right? Because we're competing for dual platforms, and the platform of the mainstream media, that's not going to do anything for the people who actually need to hear what our people on the ground have to say. And we got to get that through our heads, right? I mean, local radio, go around the corner and do the interview on the local radio station that everybody's listening to, or the local cable access station, right? Don't worry about the national conglomerates. Go around the corner and do your own press release, so that you're not spending your energy fighting to get on the box, right? Go over here, because I guarantee you, if 5 or 6 or 7 of y'all go over here and have your own press release, guess what's going to happen over here? Their camera's going to follow you around the corner. And then the OGs, they're going to realize that their moment truly has come.
Wow. Well, we only have, thank you so much, Dr. Price. We only have a few more minutes left. And I just have, one last question. What advice would you give our audience about the steps to become a strong leader?
Yes, I would say the people who you respect, ask them a couple of questions. the first question I always love to ask is that when you got to the fork in the road, you clearly decided to go to the right. But what held you from going to the left and taking that other route? I asked that question. And then I always ask this question, if you knew then what you knew now, what would you do differently? Because I'm gonna put myself, for this person who I look up to, I'm gonna put myself in their then. And so how can what you know now influence my now, which is your then, and help me to make better decisions? But the best thing, for any leader, leaders should always be reading too, as well. And then leaders should always be asking questions. What am I missing? What am I not seeing? Why does this person think this way? Why does this person speak this way? What inspires them? And then also be true to yourself. What do I believe that God put me on this planet to do, to achieve, to accomplish? And what are the best strategies beyond prayer that I can learn and hone so I can be effective and efficient in doing that? And then always find somebody a little ahead of the journey than you. And if you respect them, if you appreciate them and value them, don't be afraid to be in relationship with them.
That's great advice. Thank you, Dr. Price, for your wisdom and your thoughts today. I'm sure our audience have learned a lot from this discussion, as I did. And we want to know how we can get in contact with you. And can you tell us some things that you're doing now that you want people to know about?
Well, we're doing a few things. Much of that you can find on my website, emmettprice.com. I'm more of a Twitter or an Instagram person, so you can find me, Emmett G Price III, all one word. We're working on a number of things through the Black Christian Experience Resource Center to bring some resources to folks around the nation, literally around the world. And then my post at Berkeley College of Music and Boston Conservatory at Berkeley, we're doing a lot of youth development programs. Some of it is here in Greater Boston. Some of it will be launching around the nation as well with some of our partners. And so, stay tuned. I don't have any big dates or anything to offer you, no big reveals, but stay tuned, and would love to learn from people in terms of what is needed in various communities that we can use our platforms and position and power to leverage, but also what do you want to hear and what do you want to see?
Thank you again. Today we discussed the qualities of a good leader in crisis, what to look for, and how to identify strong leadership. Now I would like to make room for my closing thoughts. Psalm 78:72, the word reads, "With upright heart he shepherded them and guided them with his skillful hand." There is much responsibility to consider in areas of leadership. Being skillful and having a good heart are two qualities one must consider. For we are tasked with not only guiding, but teaching and supporting others as leaders. And it must be done with compassion. Why? To lead another, we have to understand what the person's needs are, that they don't fall into what we think as value, but the value of the individual or community is seeking guidance. Until next time on Make Room, I'm your host, Kenneth Young. Thank you for tuning in.